The millionaire widower's twins couldn't sleep until the new black nanny did something unthinkable. She's manipulating those children with some kind of dark magic. The accusation shattered the morning silence of the Whitmore estate like glass hitting marble. Victoria Ashford, the 52-year-old head of staff, stood rigid in the pristine white kitchen, her perfectly manicured hands trembling as she clutched a crystal water glass. Her steel-gray hair was pulled into its usual severe bun, and her pale blue eyes blazed with what she called righteous concern. "Mr. Whitmore, you simply must listen to reason," she continued, her voice carrying that particular tone of authority she'd perfected over 15 years of managing the household. Those twin boys who screamed bloody murder every single night for 10 months straight are now sleeping like they've been bewitched or something equally disturbing. Jasmine Washington stood perfectly still near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the manicured gardens, her deep brown eyes calm as she watched Victoria work herself into what appeared to be a carefully orchestrated panic. At 31, Jasmine possessed the kind of serene confidence that either put people immediately at ease or, in cases like Victoria's, triggered every insecurity they'd ever harbored about their own competence. "I'm telling you, Mr. Whitmore," Victoria pressed on, her voice rising to match the dramatic flair of her gestures, "no ordinary person takes two completely traumatized 6-year-olds who haven't had a decent night's sleep since their mother's funeral and transforms them into perfect angels in just 3 weeks. She's using some kind of unnatural methods." David Whitmore, real estate mogul and devastated father, stood between his trusted household manager and the quiet woman who had somehow managed to bring peace back to his shattered home. For the first time in 10 months, his twin sons, Mason and Matthew, were sleeping through the night, eating their meals without tantrums, and had even started asking about returning to school. "Victoria," he said carefully, his voice carrying the weight of exhaustion that had become his constant companion. "Those are very serious allegations you're making about Ms. Washington." "Serious indeed, Mr. Whitmore," Victoria exclaimed, moving closer to the imported Italian marble island that dominated the center of the kitchen. "This woman appears out of nowhere from some questionable neighborhood in Detroit with barely any references from respectable families, and suddenly—" She snapped her fingers with theatrical precision. "Our boys who woke up screaming about their mother every single night are sleeping like they've been hypnotized or drugged." Jasmine took a slow, measured breath, her gaze never wavering from David's face. There was something in his expression that went beyond simple gratitude for the tranquility she'd brought to his household. It was genuine curiosity about who she really was beneath the surface of what appeared to be a standard domestic arrangement. And he had every right to be curious. Why would a woman who spoke with the refined eloquence of someone with advanced education, who could discuss child psychology with academic precision, who carried herself with the dignity of a professional, accept a position that had sent 8 previous nannies fleeing within weeks? "Victoria," Jasmine said, her voice carrying that same gentle authority that could soothe a crying child or apparently rattle a suspicious household manager. "If you're truly concerned about my methods with the children, I have a simple suggestion. Install security cameras in the boys' bedroom. Let everyone see exactly what happens during our nighttime routine." The suggestion hit the room like a lightning strike. Victoria's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her face cycling through emotions like a broken traffic light. After all, a guilty person would never invite additional scrutiny, would they? David studied Jasmine's serene expression, noting once again the quiet confidence that seemed almost incongruous with someone he'd hired for childcare. Over the past 3 weeks, he'd observed peculiar things about her behavior. She quoted developmental psychology research with scholarly precision, spoke fluent French with their landscaping crew, and carried herself with a poise that made even his most arrogant business partners treat her with unusual deference. 3 weeks ago, when the elite childcare agency had contacted him offering Jasmine's services, David had been at his absolute breaking point. Mason and Matthew, traumatized by witnessing their mother's fatal car accident, had transformed his mansion into a battleground of grief and rage. They refused to sleep, threw violent tantrums at the mere mention of bedtime, and seemed determined to psychologically destroy anyone who attempted to care for them. Victoria had made her feelings about Those people, caring for children from established families, abundantly clear from the moment Jasmine walked through the front door. But when Jasmine arrived that first evening, something extraordinary happened. The twins, who typically hid from any new adult, had approached her with cautious fascination. That very first night, miracle of miracles, they slept for 8 uninterrupted hours. Cameras, Victoria repeated weakly, as if the word left a bitter taste in her mouth. Well, that's not really necessary if she'd simply explain her methods to those of us responsible for these children's well-being. Jasmine reached into her jacket pocket with deliberate slowness and withdrew her smartphone. Actually, I've been documenting the boys' progress every evening for my own professional records. Would you like to review some of the recordings? The silence that followed could have been sliced with a scalpel. David noticed the subtle shift in Victoria's expression from righteous indignation to something that looked suspiciously like barely contained panic. Standing there in that magnificent kitchen where generations of wealthy families had made decisions about the lives of their employees, Jasmine held herself with the quiet dignity of someone who knew exactly what game was being played and who was already 5 moves ahead of her opponents. If this story of prejudice disguised as protective concern has captured your attention, don't forget to smash that subscribe button, because what Jasmine revealed next would prove that underestimating someone based on appearances and assumptions can be the most catastrophic mistake of your life. Victoria Ashford was not prepared to surrender without mounting a vigorous defense. In her 15 years of service to the Whitmore family, she had cultivated an impeccable reputation for loyalty, discretion, and what she considered superior judgment regarding household staff. She absolutely would not permit some opportunistic outsider to waltz into her domain and undermine everything she had meticulously constructed. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, positioning herself strategically near the window that provided a perfect view of the expansive backyard, where Mason and Matthew were actually playing peacefully for the first time since their mother's tragic death. "You need to understand the gravity of what's occurring here. This woman materializes from some rough urban environment with questionable references, and suddenly she possesses magical abilities with your children. Please, sir, surely you can see through such obvious manipulation." David watched his sons chasing soap bubbles across the perfectly manicured lawn, their genuine laughter echoing through the afternoon air. It was impossible to deny the dramatic transformation. They were consuming complete meals, sleeping soundly through the night, and had even begun asking questions about resuming their education. "Victoria, perhaps you're overanalyzing this situation. The boys are being systematically manipulated," Victoria interrupted sharply, her voice taking on the cutting edge she reserved for dealing with service providers she deemed beneath the family standards. "And you can't recognize it because you're desperate for any solution that might bring peace to this household. But I know her type, Mr. Whitmore. They arrive humble and grateful, perform their little miracles, and then the demands begin. First a salary increase, then expensive gifts for their families, then before you realize what's happening, they're requesting access to your financial accounts and personal information." Jasmine remained perfectly motionless, observing Victoria's performance with the kind of tranquil expression that only seemed to intensify the household manager's frustration. This reaction was precisely what she had anticipated from the moment she stepped off the taxi at the corner of Whitmore Avenue 3 weeks earlier. Growing up in Detroit as the daughter of a single mother who worked multiple cleaning jobs for affluent families, Jasmine had witnessed this exact power dynamic play out countless times. Established employees fiercely protecting their territory against newcomers, especially when those newcomers didn't conform to expected demographic profiles. What Victoria didn't realize was that Jasmine Washington held a doctorate in child development from Northwestern University, had served as a pediatric trauma specialist at Children's Hospital of Michigan for 9 years, and had accepted this particular position for reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with financial necessity. "You know what disturbs me most about her behavior?" Victoria continued, clearly losing her composure as Jasmine's calm demeanor remained unshakable. "It's that insufferable confidence. Any normal person would display nervousness when accused of whatever dark art she's employing on those innocent children. but observe her standing there like she possesses some secret knowledge that we're not privy to. David had to acknowledge that Victoria raised a valid point. Jasmine did conduct herself with an almost unsettling assurance, like someone who was perpetually several steps ahead of everyone else in any given situation. "Actually," Jasmine said softly, "I do possess knowledge that you don't." The temperature in the room seemed to plummet 10 degrees. Victoria paled visibly, as if she had just summoned something she wasn't prepared to confront. "I know that Mason wakes up at 2:43 a.m. every night because he has recurring nightmares about the screeching sound of brakes that couldn't stop in time," Jasmine continued, her voice maintaining its gentle tone despite the devastating precision of her words. "I know that Matthew can't fall asleep until he performs a ritualistic check of every window lock in the house, because in his 6-year-old mind, if locks couldn't keep the drunk driver out of their car's path, maybe they can prevent death from finding its way into this house." David felt the oxygen leave his lungs entirely. How could she possibly know such intimate details about his son's trauma responses? He had never shared with anyone the specific circumstances of the accident, about how the boys had been in the back seat when the drunk driver ran the red light, about how they had been conscious and screaming when the paramedics arrived. "I also know," Jasmine continued, now directing her steady gaze toward Victoria, "that you've been informing the other household managers in this neighborhood that the Whitmore family requires someone of appropriate background and breeding to care for the children." Quite fascinating conversations in the elite domestic professionals network group. Wouldn't you agree? Victoria's complexion shifted from pale to deep crimson in the span of a heartbeat. "How did you? I never—" "Oh, but you absolutely did," Jasmine replied with that same maddening composure. "You even suggested that I was probably here to take advantage of a vulnerable widowed father. Those were your precise words from last Thursday's group chat discussion, weren't they?" David turned slowly toward Victoria, profound disbelief etching lines across his features. "Victoria, is this accurate?" The household manager stammered, panic clearly setting in. How did this woman have access to her private communications? And why did she seem to know exactly which pressure points to target? Jasmine remained composed, but there was something steel-like in her eyes that Victoria was finally beginning to recognize as genuine danger. "The truth, Mr. Whitmore," Jasmine said, "is that I didn't accept this position because I desperately needed employment. I accepted it because your family requires much more than just childcare assistance." She paused, allowing that statement to penetrate before delivering the next revelation. "And Victoria has been actively sabotaging any genuine healing in this household for much longer than you could possibly imagine." For the first time in the 15 years David had known his household manager, he witnessed authentic fear flicker across her features. And for the first time since he'd hired Jasmine Washington, he began to comprehend that there was infinitely more to this quietly formidable woman than anyone could have anticipated. Every accusation Victoria launched seemed only to strengthen something profound within Jasmine, as if each act of prejudice was fuel for a carefully banked fire that was now ready to ignite. "Do you want to know the complete truth about what's been happening in this house?" Jasmine asked, her voice maintaining that same gentle tone that was beginning to unnerve even David. "Then let's start from the very beginning." She walked over to the antique console table and retrieved a leather portfolio that David had never seen before. The way she handled it suggested it contained something of tremendous significance. "Victoria, are you absolutely certain you want to continue with these accusations? Because once I open this portfolio, there's absolutely no going back for any of us." The terror in the household manager's eyes was almost palpable now. "Mr. Whitmore, she's attempting to intimidate us," Victoria said, but her voice had lost all of its earlier conviction. "This is precisely the kind of manipulative behavior I was warning you about." But David found himself completely captivated by the transformation he was witnessing. The woman he had hired as a nanny was revealing layers of complexity that utterly shattered his preconceptions. Jasmine wasn't just educated, she was strategic. She wasn't just competent. She was formidable. 3 weeks ago when I accepted this position," Jasmine continued, opening the portfolio with deliberate care, It wasn't because I was desperate for employment. It was because I received a very intriguing phone call from someone you know quite well. She extracted a digital recorder and placed it on the marble countertop. Dr. Patricia Chen, the child psychiatrist who has been treating Mason and Matthew since their mother's death. She contacted me after Victoria called her office to question my professional qualifications before I had even begun working here. David felt ice water flow through his veins. Victoria, you contacted the boy's psychiatrist. I was simply being thorough, Victoria stammered, realizing she had walked directly into a trap she hadn't even seen being constructed. I wanted to verify that she was qualified to work with traumatized children. Jasmine pressed play. Dr. Chen's professional voice filled the elegant kitchen. Victoria, I need to share something important with you. Dr. Jasmine Washington isn't just an ordinary child care provider. She holds a doctorate in developmental psychology and specializes in pediatric trauma recovery. When I learned she had accepted the Whitmore position, I was absolutely fascinated. A professional of her caliber doesn't accept domestic work unless there's a very specific and compelling reason. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of children's laughter drifting in from the garden, the first genuine laughter those walls had heard in 10 months. Alexander stared at Jasmine as if seeing her for the first time. You have a doctorate? Northwestern University, with a specialization in trauma-informed therapeutic intervention for children who have experienced sudden loss, Jasmine confirmed with a slight smile. I directed the pediatric grief counseling program at Children's Hospital of Michigan for 9 years before establishing my own private practice. Victoria was visibly trembling now. That doesn't make logical sense. If you're so successful professionally, why would I accept a position that pays a fraction of what I used to earn? Jasmine finished the question smoothly. Because this was never about the money, Victoria. This was about justice. She pulled a thick file from her portfolio and placed it on the counter. 6 months ago, David, you terminated an employee from Whitmore Development Group for what your Human Resources Department called cultural misalignment. Do you remember Dr. Samuel Washington, the urban planning specialist who designed your revolutionary affordable housing initiative? David's frown deepened. Samuel, yes, there were some concerns about his fit with the company culture. The concerns, Jasmine said, placing a printed email on the counter, originated from Victoria's suggestion to your HR director that employees of his background and upbringing might not represent the Whitmore brand appropriately. Email dated March 8th, copied to 4 members of your executive team. Victoria went white as fresh snow. How do you have access to internal company communications? Because Dr. Samuel Washington is my husband. The revelation struck the room like a thunderbolt. David sank into the nearest chair, the full weight of what he was hearing crashing over him like a tsunami. And when he told me about the systematic discrimination he experienced at your company, discrimination that cost him his position 3 weeks before our daughter's first birthday, I decided to personally investigate the family environment that fostered such toxic thinking. Jasmine's voice maintained its gentle tone, but there was an underlying strength that commanded absolute attention. Samuel spent 6 months unemployed, Mr. Whitmore. 6 months watching our savings evaporate while our daughter needed specialized medical care that our insurance no longer covered. 6 months wondering if his brilliant mind and innovative ideas weren't valuable because they came packaged in the wrong racial profile. David ran his hands through his hair, genuine shock etched across his features. I had absolutely no idea. I trusted my HR team to make fair decisions based purely on performance and qualifications. Of course you didn't know, Jasmine replied. Because people like Victoria operate in the shadows, whispering poison into the ears of decision-makers, planting seeds of doubt about the competence and trustworthiness of people they deem unsuitable for your social circle. Victoria made one last desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. Mr. Whitmore, can't you see what's happening here? She planned every single detail of this elaborate revenge scheme. She's here to destroy our family. You're absolutely correct, Victoria, Jasmine said, and there was something almost dangerous in her smile. I did plan every single detail of this confrontation, but not to destroy anyone. To expose the truth about how prejudice operates in families like this, how it seeps from household decisions into corporate boardrooms, poisoning everything it touches. She picked up her smartphone and displayed a series of screenshots. Every conversation we've had over the past 21 days has been legally recorded with your full knowledge and consent. I informed you on my first day that I would be documenting my interactions for professional development purposes. Every racially charged comment, every attempt to undermine my relationship with the children, every suggestion that I was somehow unworthy of this position, all of it documented with legal precision. David watched Victoria crumble before his eyes. The woman he had trusted as a cornerstone of his household had been systematically exposed as someone who operated from dangerous and deeply rooted prejudices. Mason and Matthew are sleeping peacefully because they finally have someone who understands childhood trauma providing their care, Jasmine explained. Not because they're being manipulated or medicated, but because they're receiving proper therapeutic intervention from a qualified professional who recognizes the signs of unresolved grief in young children. She closed the portfolio and looked directly at David. The question now is, what are you going to do with this information? Will you continue allowing people like Victoria to influence your decisions about employees, about your children's care, about who deserves respect and opportunity in your household and your business? At that precise moment, Mason and Matthew burst through the patio doors from the garden, their faces glowing with the kind of pure joy that had been absent from the Whitmore mansion for far too long. "Daddy, Jasmine!" Mason called out, his small hands covered in dirt from exploring. "We found a bird's nest with baby robins in the oak tree, and Jasmine taught us how to watch them without scaring the mama bird," Matthew added, beaming as he ran to her side. "She said patience and respect help families feel safe." The children's innocent exuberance stood in stark contrast to the heavy tension filling the room. Jasmine knelt to embrace them, and David watched as his sons melted into her arms with the kind of trust that had taken months to develop with any adult after their mother's death. For a moment, watching his sons finally experiencing happiness, seeing his household manager exposed for the prejudiced person she truly was, and realizing that the woman who had saved his family was someone seeking justice for her own husband, David understood that he was witnessing a masterclass in how privilege and power could be used either to perpetuate injustice or to correct it. But what neither David nor Victoria knew yet was that Jasmine had uncovered connections between the household manager's domestic discrimination and Whitmore Development's corporate practices that went far beyond her husband's case. Connections that, once revealed, would not only end careers, but potentially transform how the entire real estate development industry thought about diversity, inclusion, and the true cost of unconscious bias. The twins' joyful interruption had provided a temporary respite from the tension, but Jasmine knew this was precisely the moment she had been building toward for 3 weeks. "Mason, Matthew," she said with that warm smile that could melt the hardest heart. "Why don't you show Daddy and Victoria the memory books we've been creating about your feelings and your mama?" The boys ran excitedly to retrieve their therapeutic journals, leaving the 3 adults in charged silence. Victoria saw her opportunity for one final, desperate counterattack. "Mr. Whitmore, can't you see what's happening? She's even manipulating the children's emotional development, making them psychologically dependent on her presence. This is textbook manipulation disguised as therapy." "Victoria," Jasmine interrupted gently, picking up her tablet, "are you absolutely certain you want to continue down this path? Because I still have recordings from the Whitmore Development Holiday Gala last December, where you told Mrs. Harrison from the City Planning Commission that people like me shouldn't have unsupervised access to children from traditional American families." Victoria's face drained of all color. The holiday gala had been attended by 75 of the most influential families in the metropolitan area's development and political community. If those recordings became public. "I also have your messages to the Elite Domestic Professionals Network," Jasmine continued, swiping through her tablet. where you shared unauthorized photographs of me, speculated about my real agenda with the Whitmore family, and warned other families to be cautious about these types of people gaining access to their private lives. David stepped forward, taking the tablet from Jasmine's hands. His expression hardened as he read through the messages. Victoria, you shared photographs of my children's caregiver with strangers? You discussed our private family business in online forums? Mr. Whitmore, I was simply being protective of your family's interests and reputation, Victoria pleaded, but her voice had lost all of its earlier authority. Protective? David's voice rose. You violated my family's privacy, spread personal information about our household, and had the audacity to interfere in my company's hiring decisions based on racial prejudice. Jasmine watched the dynamic unfold with quiet satisfaction. Every revelation had been carefully orchestrated, knowing that David's pride as both a father and a businessman would be the most powerful weapon against Victoria's toxic influence. But there's significantly more, Jasmine said, opening another folder on her tablet. Victoria, do you remember recommending the dismissal or demotion of 7 employees of color from Whitmore Development over the past 4 years? The silence was deafening. Maria Rodriguez, architectural designer, transferred to the least desirable department after you suggested she didn't quite project the company's sophisticated image. James Thompson, project manager, passed over for promotion after you questioned whether clients would feel comfortable with his leadership style. And my husband Samuel, of course. How do you have access to internal company information? David demanded, genuinely confused. Because after Samuel was terminated, I began systematically investigating the hiring, promotion, and termination patterns at Whitmore Development. I discovered that Victoria was in regular contact with 5 people in your HR department, always offering insights about employees based on observations she made during company social events. Jasmine displayed a comprehensive spreadsheet on her tablet. Over the past 4 years, 16 employees of color have been fired, demoted, or passed over for promotion at Whitmore Development. In 81% of those cases, there was documented communication from Victoria in the personnel files, always raising concerns about cultural fit or client comfort levels. David sat down heavily, the full scope of what he was learning hitting him like a physical blow. My God, Victoria, is this accurate? The household manager finally broke completely. I was just trying to protect the company's reputation and standards. People like her husband don't understand our clientele, our social expectations, our business culture. Our standards? David exploded. What standards are those? Discrimination, prejudice, destroying the careers of brilliant people based on the color of their skin? At that moment, Mason and Matthew came running back with their journals, their faces bright with innocent pride. Look, Daddy, Mason exclaimed, showing a watercolor painting of a dark-skinned woman reading to 2 small boys. This is Jasmine helping us understand that Mama's love stays with us even when we feel scared and alone. And here's where she taught us the butterfly breathing technique when we have the scary dreams, Matthew added, displaying another page filled with colorful drawings of children doing calming exercises. The pure innocence of their therapeutic progress stood in brutal contrast to the poisonous reality that had been exposed in that room. David looked at his sons, finally healing, finally sleeping, finally able to process their grief in healthy ways, and realized the magnitude of the injustice he had unknowingly allowed to flourish under his own roof. Victoria, he said, his voice now controlled but absolutely final. You're terminated immediately. I want you out of this house within 2 hours. Mr. Whitmore, please, she begged. 15 years of loyal service, 15 years of devotion to your family. 15 years of influencing my decisions with prejudice, he corrected firmly. 15 years of sabotaging qualified employees. 15 years of poisoning the environment of both my home and my company. Jasmine retrieved one final folder from her materials. David, there's one more thing you need to understand. Victoria didn't just influence terminations. She also blocked qualified hires. She showed him a collection of resumes. 23 highly qualified candidates were rejected over the past 3 years after Victoria conducted informal background assessments on their families and social connections. Among them were 3 engineers with degrees from MIT, 2 project managers with Harvard MBAs, and an environmental sustainability expert who had worked for Tesla. All people of color, David noted, scanning through the impressive qualifications. Exactly. Meanwhile, less qualified candidates who fit Victoria's preferred demographic profile were hired at higher salaries and in more prestigious positions. Victoria made one last desperate plea. "Mr. Whitmore, she orchestrated all of this. It's an elaborate trap designed to destroy me and manipulate you." "Trap?" Jasmine smiled softly. "Victoria, it would only be a trap if I had fabricated your words, forged your emails, or created false evidence. All I did was document and organize your own actions over the past 4 years." David turned to his sons, who were watching the adult tension with obvious confusion. "Boys, why don't you go wash up for lunch while the grown-ups finish talking?" When the children left, he faced Victoria one final time. "You have 2 hours to pack your belongings. I don't want to see you on this property again." "And the company?" Jasmine asked quietly. David took a deep breath. "Tomorrow morning, I'm initiating a complete audit of our hiring, promotion, and termination processes for the past 5 years. Every affected employee will be contacted with offers of reinstatement, promotion, or appropriate financial compensation." Victoria stumbled from the room, 15 years of influence and manipulation crumbling in less than 3 hours when confronted with documented evidence of her discriminatory behavior. Jasmine watched the household manager leave, feeling not cruelty, but a deep sense of justice finally served with surgical precision. "Why?" David asked when they were alone. "Why endure all of this? Why take care of my children? Endure months of prejudice just to expose Victoria? Because injustice unchallenged becomes injustice normalized," Jasmine replied simply. "And because Mason and Matthew deserve to grow up in a world where their worth is measured by their character and capabilities, not by their appearance or their family's social standing." But there was one final revelation that neither David nor Victoria had suspected. A discovery Jasmine had made about connections between the household manager's domestic discrimination and a much larger network of systematic exclusion that extended throughout the metropolitan area's development elite. Connections that would soon transform not just one family or one company, but an entire industry's approach to diversity and inclusion. 1 year later. The transformation in Mason and Matthew's lives was just one small part of a much larger revolution that Jasmine had quietly orchestrated throughout the metropolitan area's development community. Dr. Samuel Washington sat in his new corner office at Whitmore Development Group, now serving as Vice President of Inclusive Community Design, a position created specifically to leverage his expertise in developing affordable housing solutions that strengthened rather than displaced existing communities. His salary had increased by 75%, and he held significant equity in the company as compensation for the months of unemployment he had endured. "I still can't believe my wife planned all of this," he told David during one of their weekly strategy meetings, which now focused on creating the most inclusive development practices in the region. "She spent months researching, documenting, strategizing every single move." David smiled, looking out at the diverse group of employees collaborating in the innovation center that Samuel had designed. "Jasmine didn't just save my sons from their trauma. She saved my company from becoming irrelevant in a world that demands authentic diversity and meaningful community impact." The comprehensive audit had revealed patterns even more extensive than David had imagined. 22 former employees were reinstated or compensated appropriately. 9 managers who had participated in discriminatory practices were terminated. The company implemented revolutionary blind hiring protocols, unconscious bias training, and an employee advocacy program that became a model for the entire industry. Victoria, meanwhile, discovered that 15 years of influence built on prejudice didn't create a sustainable professional network. None of the elite families would hire her after Jasmine's documentation circulated discreetly through the domestic professional community. She was now working as an administrative assistant at a budget hotel chain, earning less than a third of her previous salary. The most remarkable thing, David continued, is that Jasmine never wanted to destroy anyone. She wanted to transform the entire system. Jasmine had declined David's offer to become Whitmore Development's permanent director of workplace equity. Instead, she used her documented experience to launch a consulting firm specializing in identifying and correcting institutional bias in corporate environments. Her first major client was a Fortune 100 company facing a federal discrimination investigation. Mason and Matthew, now 7 years old, attended a progressive school that David had chosen specifically for its commitment to diversity and emotional intelligence education. Jasmine still visited them twice a week, no longer as their nanny, but as Dr. Jasmine, the woman who had transformed their nightmares into peaceful dreams and taught them that families are built on love, acceptance, and understanding. "Daddy, is Dr. Jasmine coming to our school presentation?" Matthew asked over breakfast, wearing the compass necklace she had given him to remind him that he could always find his way back to love and safety. "Of course, buddy, and Uncle Samuel will be there too, along with all of our chosen family," David replied, still amazed at how natural it felt to consider Jasmine's extended family as his own. The true measure of Jasmine's success wasn't found in the impressive client list of her consulting firm or the 22 employees who had been reinstated at Whitmore Development. It was in the phone call she received just last week from a young black father in Portland who had seen her TED Talk about systematic bias in childcare. "My son is being treated differently at his daycare," the man had said, his voice filled with the same pain Jasmine remembered from her husband's experience. "The teachers say he's aggressive, but I know he's just energetic and curious. Can you help me document what's really happening?" Jasmine had smiled, opening a fresh case file. "Let's start from the beginning. Tell me everything you've observed, because the most powerful form of justice isn't destroying those who try to diminish you. It's building bridges where they built walls, creating opportunities where they created barriers, and transforming pain into purpose that reaches far beyond your own experience." David Whitmore learned that privilege without awareness is a weapon of mass destruction, but privilege with purpose can rewrite entire industries. Victoria tried to use prejudice as power, but discovered that hatred always builds castles on quicksand. Jasmine Washington used intelligence as justice and created a legacy that will impact generations of children and families. If this story of courage, strategy, and transformation has inspired you, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell, because sometimes changing the world starts with one person brave enough to document the truth and strategic enough to use it with laser-focused precision. The revolution isn't always loud. Sometimes it's as quiet as a brilliant woman turning darkness into light, one family at a time.